Good afternoon and welcome to this month's Launch Awesome AMA. I'm Steve. I run the Launch Awesome community. Today I'm joined by someone who needs no introduction, April Dunford. She's the author of Obviously Awesome and also runs her own positioning agency. Today, April and I are going to be discussing strategies for consistently reinforcing your product positioning with each new launch, kind of aiming to prevent your well-crafted positioning doc that you probably spent weeks putting together from just being relegated to some corner of your Notion workspace, right? If this is your first time joining us, these AMAs, they're put on by the Launch Awesome community, which is a Slack community for product folks. So PMs, PMMs, product ops people, to talk about the strategies, tactics, pro tips we use to build and launch successful products and build successful product teams. We have over 600 of the best in product and product marketing from companies like Webflow, Hopin, Loom, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to join, just Google Launch Awesome. It's the first thing that comes up. You'll find an application to join there. And with that, we can get into it. April, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, totally. So for the folks that don't know, give us just kind of the 2-minute highlight reel of your career so far. Let us kind of know where you're coming from.
Yeah, so I spent the first 25 years of my career being a repeat vice president of marketing at a series of venture-backed startups. Like my first job before when I was junior was product marketing manager. So, I started there, and then I became VP marketing. And then basically my whole career arc looked like this. You hire me as the VP marketing. We would, I'd come in to try to tool up the marketing team and get revenue going like this. If we did our jobs well, we got acquired. And then I would spend the next 2 years at some big company doing my earnout. And then I would bounce out and I would go to the next company and do it again. So I did that 7 times. And after the 7th one, I decided maybe I should do something else. So I made the switch to consulting. And now what I do is I work with growth stage tech companies. My main focus is B2B, in particular B2B, where there's a sales team. So there's somewhat of a complex sales motion. And my only focus is positioning work. That's all I do.
Yeah. One thing that's really curious to me about that is like particularly with companies that have a sales team, and I got a book coming out around it. I feel like there's been, I don't know, for the past year and a half, there was such an emphasis on people moving to PLG. And then I just saw either like maybe Leah Theron or maybe it was Elena Berna talking about a lot of companies actually maybe kind of moving with the economic climate, moving kind of back towards more like sales led. I'm curious if you've kind of seen anything around that and maybe how that kind of, I don't know, has affected things around how you think about positioning or how you're advising companies.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of instances where product-led growth can be an actual real accelerant in the deal pipeline. Like if you can get people in and using the product and mucking around with it, particularly where the end users have power to make purchase decisions, right? Then let's just get the end users using the thing. And if our product is great, it'll sell itself and let's go. And like, I'm a big believer in that. But I also think there's a lot of things that just don't get sold that way. Like they get, you're not actually selling to the end users. You're selling to the manager over top of the end users. There's still a role for product-led growth in there to get people, using the thing. But there's a sales motion to come in over top and sell to the manager or the executive that is going to buy for the entire organization or something like that. The other thing I see is that a lot of companies start out doing product-led growth stuff or very hands-off sales motion when their deal sizes are small, because you don't want to talk to a salesperson if all you're doing is selling something that's $100 or $1,000. You can slap down a credit card and buy that. And like, it's not that difficult to make a decision because there isn't a lot of stakes in that decision. If it's $200 and I make a bad decision, I'll just cancel and try something else. It's no big deal. On the other hand, if I'm buying something that's $50,000, $100,000, now I got a deal team because this is a high stakes decision for the company. And there are multiple stakeholders involved in making the decision to actually adopt this thing. There's a big change management motion to adopt this thing. And so now what we have is something where a salesperson has a lot of value to potentially add there and helping people understand their choices, making sure the company makes a good choice or feels confident that they're making a good choice, and then helping get alignment across the entire deal team. So I don't think product-led growth is obviously not going away. I think that's a trend, and I think we will continue to see companies push further and further into that. But I also don't think sales is going away. Like, I think there's, a lot of there are a lot of products out there that would be very, very difficult to sell with no salesperson involvement at all. So I think we're
Mhm.
going to see more and more product-led growth, but I also think there's a big role for sales to play, especially in these bigger enterprise deals.
Yes, totally. Okay. I know you've covered this a lot in just other podcasts. We actually even did your book for our own book club here in the community. I was wondering if you could just spend quick 3 to 5 minutes with just your definition of positioning and just kind of quickly running through the 5+1 steps for getting there.
Sure. So my definition of positioning is this. Like, positioning defines how our product is the best in the world at providing something, like some value that a very specific set of customers cares a lot about. So in essence, it defines uh, why a certain kind of customer should pick our stuff over all of the other alternatives. So the way I came up with this was first kind of thinking about how do we break positioning into component pieces. So the pieces are, we have competitive alternatives. So if we didn't exist, what would a customer do? Put another way, what do we have to beat in order to win a deal? So that
Mhm.
includes whatever the status quo is, as well as anything that lands on a short list. It's differentiated capabilities or features of a product, capabilities of the company. The third component is differentiated value. Customers don't actually care about your features, they care about what the features enable for their business. The fourth component is best fit customers or target customers. So, who is it that we're trying to sell to? Who's a really good fit for our stuff? And the last one's market category. Are we email or chat? Or am I a database or a business intelligence tool? So, what exactly are we?
Mhm.
My methodology is about working through those five component pieces in a very specific order. So we start by putting a stake in the ground with competitive alternatives. So we say,
Mhm.
look, like, if we didn't exist, this is what we have to beat. Like, this is what companies would be using. So this is what I have to position against. And then I say, all right, so if I know this, then I can say, well, what have I got that they don't have? That's my differentiated capabilities. Then I can translate those capabilities into value by going down the capabilities and say, okay, I got this fancy AI, whatever feature. So what? Why does a customer care? Why does anybody care that we can do that? What's
Mhm.
the value that feature delivers? Then I can move to, okay, I have two or three value buckets or value themes. And then we can say, all right, we're the only company in the world that delivers the combination of A plus B plus C. Who cares a lot about that? And specifically, what are the characteristics of a target account that make them care a lot about that? That's my definition of a best fit customer. And then
Mhm.
market category is a little bit more esoteric, but essentially, your best market category is the market category that you position your product in such that this value is kind of obvious to these people. And so that's my methodology in, like, a minute and a half.
Yes. Yes.
Trust me, there's
Okay.
1,001 ways to screw it up, but that's kind of the nut of what I'm trying to teach people.
Okay. Okay, great. Love that. Okay, and since we're going to be kind of talking a little bit about using product launches to reinforce that, um, can we, let's see, what do we need to do here? I want to kind of like define some words so we're all speaking the same language.
Sure.
So we have positioning, and I think some things that people kind of get confused in that, or words that are kind of in the same bucket for people, are like messaging and
Yeah.
narrative and branding. How do you kind
Branding.
of like where do those start and where do they stop? Like how do you kind of differentiate what those
Yeah,
things are?
this is a great question because I think there's a lot of confusion around that. And I think in general, like, as marketers, we sort of suck at defining things. Like, we'll
It's
we'll
kind of
take a
funny and
thing
ironic.
and then just turn it into something else and say,
Mhm.
"Oh, brand used to mean this, but now it means this." And then everybody's like, "Now I don't have any idea what brand means
Right.
anymore." Like,
Yeah.
but so here's how I look at it. A lot of people would disagree with me, but
Yeah.
I kind of think about positioning as the fundamental underpinning to everything we do in marketing and sales. Like, if you were to come to me and say, April, write us some messaging. Like, we need messaging for the homepage. I say, great, messaging. Let's do it. Okay, but there's a bunch of things I'm going to need to know in order to write that messaging. So who's my target customer? What's the value that we can deliver? Oh, and by the way, not just any value, value that's differentiated from who our competitors. So I need to know who's my competition, how are we different, how do we win? What is the type of customer I'm targeting? Positioning defines those bits. So positioning is an input to messaging, but messaging is like the words we put around this stuff to
Mm-hmm.
to actually make it real. So
So,
like somebody mentioned it there. This is an analogy I use a lot, which is like, everything we do in marketing and sales is the house. Positioning is the foundation upon which the house is built. Now we
mm-hmm.
get to things like branding. Branding's probably the worst in terms of people just making up definitions of what branding is. Like it drives me absolutely nuts. So I don't know how to define branding because every week I get a new definition of branding. But in my world, which is like, B2B enterprise software, we typically think about branding as um, things like the tone of voice we're going to use, the iconography we're going to use, like what does the feel of our what is the feel of our company like, which
Mm-hmm.
translates into things like, you know, pictures and text
Yeah.
formatting
Yeah.
and photos and all that sort of stuff. Again, I don't know how to do any of that if I don't understand who I'm targeting and who am I up against and all the rest of it. So if
Mm-hmm.
you told me, hey, I've got this thing, but it's for daycare centers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So make me branding for daycare centers. Like I want to communicate a bunch of stuff. I want to communicate that we're maybe fun, we're for kids. I might use some bright
Uh-huh.
colors. I might use a certain kind of language, depending on who I'm selling to. If you came and said, no, 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 it's not that. It's cybersecurity for banks. Oh, well, that's different.
Right. Yeah.
That's different. The branding's all going to be different. So
Yes.
I think you got to have your positioning sorted out first before I get to what's my branding, what's the messaging for this. Now, narrative is a whole different thing. And again, narrative sort of a trendy thing for people to talk about right now. But
Mm-hmm.
in my world, which is again B2B kind of enterprise software, when we think about storytelling, we tell a lot of stories in these companies. So I got a story that I'm telling to the venture capitalists, and that's my story about the vision, like where we're going to be in 10 years, the all singing, all dancing future of the company. And it answers the question. That's a story that answers the question, why do you want to buy a piece of my company and invest in this company? And the answer to that is where we're going to be 10 years from now, not where we are right now, but where we're going to be 10 years from now. Now, I also have a story that is like my people talk about it as their employer brand. Again, this isn't a brand thing, but let's call it that anyways, because we're marketers. We love to make everybody confused. But I got my employer story, which
Mm-hmm.
answers the question, why should you come and join us as an employee? And
Mm-hmm.
that's usually about, your culture, and maybe you've got a higher purpose that you're working towards in the company. Maybe you have some social good things that you're doing. You've also got things you're doing for employees to help them, educate themselves and move up in their career and things like that. And that story is really different from the story you tell your venture capitalist.
Totally.
And then we have the sales pitch, which is the story we're telling in marketing and sales that answers the question, why buy this thing from me with your cold hard cash today versus all the other options I have today?
Mm-hmm.
And so when people talk about narrative, I find it often gets talked about like there's only one story, and that ain't true. There's a lot of stories. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think when people talk about the narrative, I'm like, which one?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're talking about the sales pitch, that's very different than the VC pitch. Companies I work with, which are B2B enterprise companies, sometimes you'll see this when the company is out raising money. The
Mm-hmm.
founder is out telling this story to the VCs, and sometimes that story will start creeping into the sales pitch because salespeople will hear the founder telling that story. And there's
Mm-hmm.
real danger in that, because if our sales pitch is too oriented towards the future, um, it makes it very hard to close deals, because what it sounds like is, oh, we've got this amazing thing. It's not quite here yet. And the customer's like, great, come back to me 2 years when you have it.
Got it. Okay. Okay. I hope that's More clear for everyone, definitely clears things up for me. Um, okay, getting kind of into some of the product launch stuff. One thing we hear a lot from product marketers is, the product team delivers maybe two, maybe three, if you're lucky, four things a year that are kind of a more meaningful part of this kind of like bigger story.
Mm,
Um, Everything else that ships is, it's kind of small, I don't know, almost like quality of life improvements to existing features.
yeah.
Um, and a question we often hear is like, what can we do to kind of layer these small improvements kind of back up to reinforce our overall positioning? Any tips on that, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I got a few ideas on that.
Mm,
And I got my eyes open to this when I worked at IBM. So IBM, as you can imagine, giant company, 9 million products. We're doing a release every 10 minutes.
mhm.
And they had a quota on how many press releases you could put out, right? So you so you'd come and you'd have this new thing and you thought it was really jazzy, and the PR team would just say, no, you've reached your quota of press releases, so we're not allowed to actually announce that. Really?
Oh man, yeah,
Well, great.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
cool.
we would think about we thought about launch a lot like a more like this kind of never-ending process rather than a date or an event.
Hmm.
And so now you don't always have the luxury of this, but at IBM we would have this thing which we called the rolling thunder.
Hmm.
And it's funny how much I come back to this rolling thunder concept, or I have ever since I worked at IBM.
Yeah.
So we would do the big launch, like it would be the big new version, the big new thing we'd have. And we'd plan that for, let's say that's coming out in March. So we had
Hmm.
big new, this is version 5. Version 5 is coming out. It's here. Whoa. And so we'd have a bunch of pre-launch stuff we're doing around that to get people ready for it coming. And that would go for 2-3 months. And then we'd have a launch, the actual launch, and that would run for a week. We do press around that. We're talking about the thing. But then the rest of the year, what we had were the rolling thunder post-launch things, which were actually little
Yeah.
launches in their own. And so we would do what we would call momentum launch. And so momentum launch would come like 3 months later. And
Hmm.
in that launch, we would talk about one, cool new customers. Like, so, oh, look at all these customers that are using this thing we talked about 3 months ago. We would also use that as an opportunity to generally there's a point release by that point. So we'd have a
Hmm.
bunch of new stuff in the point release, and that would give us an opportunity to talk about that stuff too. So we go back out to the press and say, oh my gosh, this thing is going amazing. We've got these big new customers. Here's what they're doing. These are the results they're seeing. And this is so great. And oh, by the way, we've got this 3 or 4, we've closed the gap on these 3 or 4 bits of technology that we're really excited to talk about. And so we would talk about that. Then we would do, so that was the momentum launch. And then there would be like I forget, we had a name for it. We had a name for it, but it was the thing that came 3 months after that, that was
Hmm.
kinda like the "It's not over yet" launch. And so we would come back at them with something else, and
Hmm.
usually what we'd have is a fairly significant point release at that point, so there'd be something jazzy to talk about, and
Yeah.
what we would do in that one is we'd try to make sure it's aligned with the news cycles. So, if there was a trendy thing that was going on in tech, we would align that we would craft a story that would align with that, which would entice the news people to write about us. So like if this was now, I'd be figuring out some angle with AI and chat GPT or whatever, and I'd be coming in and saying, hey, we've got this new thing and blah blah blah, and here's how it fits into that trend, and you want to write about us with this way. And so we would kind of do launch 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 launch.
Hmm.
Each of those launches had a different flavor though. Like there was the main launch, and that was once a year. But the other launches had their place in this kind of journey of momentum stuff. So when I launched my book, I built a launch plan that looked just like the IBM launch plan, except what I'm launching is a book. So I had
Hmm.
pre-launch stuff, and there was all this, hey, book is coming, get signed up. Oh my gosh, it's going to be so great. Ooh, look at the cover art. It's so exciting. So there's hype building. And then I have the actual launch, and it's kind of no big deal thing. Hey, book is available today, whatever. I hope I hit the bestseller list and everybody buys a bunch of books. And then like 2, 3 months later, I had kind of a mini momentum launch where I was like, look at all these new reviews I've gotten. Here's a bunch of testimonials from people that have written that people have read the book and are really excited about the book. And then 4 months after that, I released the audio book. And so that's like a point release. It's a, it's a different product, but it's kind of the
Totally.
same product.
Yeah.
So then it just gave, and then everybody's all excited. Like all the people that were waiting for the audiobook were super excited. Like, hey, audiobook is coming out. Yay. So everybody was like, hey, audiobook. And then, yeah, then someone mentioned you could do second edition, third edition. And instead, I'm just writing a new book. But,
Mhm.
but you could. So I had this kind of launch thing. And I thought that worked just as well for a book as it did for a product, to be honest.
Yeah. I love that. Kind of always kind of reaching back to kind of the major kind of tent
That's right.
pole things. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. You're basically telling the same story over and over again, but you've
Mhm.
got just enough newness there that there's something to talk about.
Okay. Yes. Yep, that makes sense. So, yes,
Yeah, rolling
very
thunder, not a flash in the pan. That's it. That's
Rolling Thunder.
exactly it.
I love that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Love that. Um,
I think a lot of people think about launches as like a day, and that you guys are the launch people. You all know this. Like it's
oh,
in a day, people. Like if it's just a day, that's a failed launch.
totally. Yeah. We talk about this with customers of launch notes kind of all the time, just about this. Launch day is like kind of the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
There's so much more under the surface around building excitement early around, yeah, just there's so much to do
yeah,
there. So I love that. Um, okay. Your book talks about positioning, like encourages people to position for best fit customers today.
yeah,
Um, and sometimes we're launching products kind of in an effort to expand the kinds of customers that we want to serve.
yeah,
And so I feel like there's almost this like natural tension between wanting to expand your positioning to include more kinds of customers, but also, so far our positioning has been for this kind of smaller group of folks.
yeah,
Any advice around kind of how do
yeah.
we navigate this?
So I got opinions about this. And again, you gotta put your filter on here. Like, where's April coming from on this? She coming from this B2B kind of enterprisey space.
Totally.
But here's the thing. Like, if we got a new thing and it's truly new, and we're about to launch it, we have to have positioning before we launch, right? Otherwise, what does it
Mhm.
say on the website or whatever? Like, how do we talk about it?
Mhm.
There is positioning, but that positioning is theoretical until
Mhm.
customers do it. So what we actually have is a positioning thesis. So
Mhm.
we built the product with this thesis. And our thesis was we think this is who we compete with. We think this is how we're different. We think this is the value that only we can deliver. Therefore, these are the kind of people that are going to love us. Therefore, this is the market we're going to win. But it's just a guess, right? Like we've done our customer discovery. We talked to lots of customers. It's as good as we can get, but it's theoretical. Now, in my opinion, and you guys are launch people, so maybe you're going to come back and school me on this. But when we did this kind of thing at any company I've worked with, the big launch, like the launch, didn't happen until we had a bunch of early customer experience. So we
Mhm.
would do what we call the early customer experience launch or the limited launch or whatever it is, where the product was available and we were testing it with a bunch of customers, and we may even have the sales team out there selling it in a very limited way,
Mhm.
but we're not going to launch until, like, as in the big PR launch, until we validated that positioning.
Mhm.
Because the thing that I've learned about positioning theses is that we're always wrong. No matter how much no matter how much we work on it and how much we talk to customers or whatever, we get it in the hands of customers and we're like, "Oh, is it like kind of right, but kind of wrong?" Like we thought these kind of people were going to love it, but it turns out there's these other kind of people, and we thought this was our value, and it is kind of, but it's actually a little bit here. And so once we've had that first wave of customer experience, then we validated the thesis. Then we can really tighten it up. And now we're ready to actually launch it, like launch it to the press, put some marketing behind it, put our foot on the gas and go run with it because we validated it. If we haven't validated it yet, again, if it's B2B enterprise stuff, I don't
Mhm.
think it's ready to launch. So
Mhm.
and that's just hair splitting on, the way we would talk about it. But like, for example, if I was doing a new thing, even if
Mhm.
I was a startup, and I had no other customers. Like, if you look at the way startups launch, like, their first wave of customers is, people in their network, like, people they can beg
Mhm.
to go use their stuff. Like, it doesn't generally make a lot of sense for you to, like, do ad campaigns and do this big, big mega launch with PR and everything else behind it until you've at least had a first wave of customers through to validate the thing. So usually your first, the thing gets released to the public, you've got a wave of customers through before you actually say, yeah, now we're ready, now we're going to go launch.
Yes.
So a lot of it, I think, depends on your definition of the word launch.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Kind of on the topic of measuring success there. I know it's kind of a bit of a fraught topic in marketing in general, but like when you're doing that, when you're testing those things,
Mm.
how do you think about like measuring positioning and messaging and whether or not it's effective? And like specifically, are there any kinds of metrics that you look at? And like what's
Yeah.
I know it's going to depend based on a million things, but like, do you have any like ballpark benchmarks for what good even looks like?
Yeah. So generally, it's a bit like looking at, yeah, things like close rates and conversion rates and stuff. It's
Yeah.
hard to have an actual number, but you can benchmark against yourself, right? So what you're looking for is numbers are moving in the right direction. So
Hmm.
if I've got an existing product and it's out in the market and it's selling or whatever, and we come in with new positioning, generally the way we would test that positioning first is we would
Hmm.
take the positioning, turn it into a sales pitch, and then we pick one salesperson, preferably our best salesperson, train
Hmm.
them on that, and then get that person doing pitches to validate it. And
Hmm.
so the way it gets validated is not so much numbers, but a good salesperson knows what a bad pitch session feels like versus a good
Yeah.
pitch session. Like, you can feel it. Like, is the customer getting excited? Do they
Hmm.
understand it? Are they asking
Hmm.
good questions or bad questions? So we can run this little test with a good salesperson. And after they've done a certain amount of pitches, we should be able to go to that salesperson and say, okay, so what do you think? Is this pitch better than the last one? And that's really all we can measure. Like, is it working better than the last one? If
Yeah.
the sales rep says, yeah, it's working better, we would start to see, like, the kind of metrics we'd be looking for is, if we rolled the pitch out, even if we haven't fixed the messaging yet to match that exactly, we should see better conversion of the right kind of customer
Hmm.
from an early sales lead to an actual opportunity.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
because the pitch is working better. And we should see that happening. We should see a higher rate of that happening. We should see that happening faster. We generally see the deal sizes go up because people are more sure of what it is they're buying and what the value is and all that kind of stuff. Once we've
Hmm.
got the marketing aligned with that, what we should get is higher quality deals coming in. So we should have less deals, dropping out at the first sales call because, they came in expecting to get something that, once they hit the pitch, they're like, oh crap, this isn't what I thought it was at all, because your positioning was confusing. And so this is the hard part about positioning. Like, when it's bad, it gets you across your whole funnel. Like, it gets you across every metric, right? Because the wrong people are coming in because they don't get what you are. They think you're something you're not. They make it to your sales rep and they drop out there because they're like, oh, gee, it's this, and I thought it was this. Sometimes you got
Hmm.
got a situation where your sales reps are actually really good at just telling some random story, getting them closed, and then they drop out because then they get into the product and they're like, oh man, this isn't the thing that I thought it really was. And I thought it was going to do other things. And, it's not
Hmm.
delivering on the promise that I thought you made. And then they churn on you. And
Right.
when the positioning is working well, all of that stuff is better. You're attracting the right people. The right people are getting in the pipeline. They're converting really quickly. You're converting more of them. They're bigger deals because they're more of your best fit customers. And then you're having way less churn because the whole thing is the right customer for the right reasons all the way across.
Yes. Yes. Love that. Claire had a great question. I'll toss up here real quick. Just around how do you sell this approach of, starting with your best sales rep to leaders who are kind of chomping at the bit to start getting revenue in?
Yeah. So, this is part of the reason why I think this is a good way to roll out new positioning. So, in my world, if we're going to do new positioning, like if we're going to work on positioning, sales should be involved in that work. So this ideally shouldn't be like a little project in the marketing department that they're just throwing it over to sales, and then sales will look at it and go, well, I don't get where it came from. I don't buy it. It doesn't necessarily match my reality. If sales is involved in building the positioning, and in my world, but I'm generally working with cross-functional team where I got product, sales, marketing all together, ideally the CEOs, lots of folks from the executive team. If sales is involved in it, then first you're going to work on the positioning. And then you're going to work on, well, what's the story that goes with this positioning? And that story sounds like a sales pitch. And so if we can storyboard that out and sales is excited about it, like, you're not going to be able to stop them from using it. They're going to be totally chomping at the bit to use it. If sales doesn't like the story, then good luck getting them to adopt it. And so the best way to make sure sales likes the story is to make sure they're involved in building it. Because if they have an objection, we want to find out about that early and we want to handle it. Because, by the way, they're the people that know how to sell. So in my world, what we're doing is we do the positioning, we take the positioning, we translate that into a sales narrative. Then marketing and sales works together on building the actual pitch, like deck, demo, script. And then, and so sales management is involved in all the way. And then usually it's just sales management will say, okay, we don't want to just throw it over to everybody in sales because, that would be really hard to get everybody onboarded and everybody using it and everybody convinced that it's the right thing to do. A much easier thing to do is to pull one and work with your head of sales on who's that person, pull one rep, work with one rep, then that rep's really comfortable. If that rep says, yep, this is good, this works better than the old sales pitch, now I can take that rep to go train the rest of the reps and convince the rest of the reps that, yes, indeed, this is a way better sales pitch. You're going to have a way higher success rate of getting the story to stick over in sales if you can have sales talking to sales about how good it is.
Yes. Love that.
Marketing talking to sales, that's a harder sell.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, because honestly, it's a little bit them and it's a little bit us.
Okay. Yeah, tell me more.
So most marketers have not spent a lot of time in sales. So they don't actually understand what happens in a sales meeting. And they don't know what a good sales pitch works like because they've never had a job where they were just doing pitches all day.
Right.
And so what we get sometimes is, we'll feel very confident about our messaging, right? So we'll take that messaging and put it in a pitch, and it might be very nice messaging, but it's a lousy pitch.
Right.
And so then sales gets it and they're like, what the heck? This is 75 slides and I got a 45-minute call and I got to do discovery in the middle of that call. And marketing's going, what's discovery? Right. And they're like, I got to do discovery in that call. Where does that happen in this pitch? Where do I negotiate pricing in this pitch? How do I do a close in this pitch? And it just doesn't meet the needs of sales. So we build them some pretty slides and a nice story. It's just not the story that they want.
Yes.
Now on the sales side, sales is comfortable with the stuff they already have, right? So they got a pitch, and even if it's bad, they're comfortable with it. They're like, oh, on slide 4, I put my little joke in here, and they say, ha, ha, ha. And that means, and so they've got their thing, and they're used to it. So you come along, and even if you've got a pitch that's killer, and you just throw it over the wall, they're like, there's change management to happen here. Like, you got to convince me that it's worth my while to abandon my old pitch, which I'm very comfortable with, by the way. And it took me a long time to get comfortable with it. I'm going to abandon that old pitch to pick up this new pitch, which, I don't know if it's good or not.
Right.
So the best way to convince a sales rep that the new pitch is good is you take the best sales rep you've got, you get that person using it a bunch, get a bunch of leads into the pipeline, and there's cool looking deals cooking. And then have that person come back and talk to your salespeople and say, I know it works because that deal, I got all of those into the pipeline using that. Now you got everybody's attention.
Yes. I think we would all do well to do each other's job sometimes.
Yeah, right. We should.
I know.
We should.
Yes.
But what's funny is I think a lot of marketers could make the transition to sales. I don't think that's true the other way. Don't let the salespeople hear me say that. I think they think our job is super easy, but they would literally die over here. Where I think a lot of marketers would actually just go over to sales and get super smart, and they'd come back and they'd be way more killer marketers. And I think a lot of salespeople would
Mm.
come into marketing and just go,
Yeah. Okay.
"Die."
That's so funny. Yes. Marketers reign supreme. I'll keep that away from our sales team. That'll stay between us.
I've done a
Um,
lot of selling in my career. I had to manage sales teams several times, and
mm,
mainly I got put in charge of managing sales teams because like the VP sales would get fired, and then they're like, "You run that," and I'll be
yeah.
like, "Really? Do I
Yeah.
have to?"
Yeah.
The first
Uh,
time I ran a sales team, those guys ran circles around me because I didn't know what they did, and
mhm.
so I actually did a big stint in sales where I just did sales calls, did all the stuff, carried a bag.
Yeah. I feel like it's
Way
funny. I feel like
smarter for it.
right. I feel like that's kind of the one thing I'm missing. I've done early stage startup stuff, and as a result, do a little bit of everything. So, like, started in front end development and design, and you do some marketing and product management. And the only thing I haven't really done a ton of is like actual sales calls. So,
You know what I think is a good stepping stone to that? Like, especially if you're in product marketing, I think a lot of product marketers could really easily do the sales engineering job if your company has that. That's like
mm,
the technical
mhm,
person that goes to the pitches and does the more technical stuff, does the demo, does the
yeah,
whatever. Isn't
mhm,
necessarily doing the closing,
mhm,
but does a lot of sales calls and sales meetings and back and forth with customers. That's a really easy transition between product marketing and that.
okay,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, okay. I'll give that a go.
Give
Um,
it a
Okay, running up on time here. This is kind of a perfect transition into. I know you're working on a book around this topic.
Yeah.
Um, Anything you can share, just kind of around. It's about sales pitches. Um, what can you
Yeah.
share?
So in this work that I've been doing, like, so, positioning is my jam. That's my focus area. And
Yeah.
with the companies I'm working with, we're working on positioning. And so I've been doing that for 6, 7 years now as a consultant. One of the things that I noticed was that if we couldn't get the positioning to make the transition from marketing to sales, then we're dead. And
Hmm.
that seemed to be the place where positioning went to die. Like, we'd all get agreement in the room. Even if I had sales in the room, everyone's happy, everyone's good. And then 6 months later, the CEO's calling me saying, "You know what? I love what we're doing in marketing. This all looks good, but if I walk over there to sales and I hear how they're pitching, they are
Mm,
not telling the same story that we're telling in marketing." And
mhm.
so my assumption when I wrote Obviously Awesome, which was my first book about positioning, was that we knew how to build a good sales pitch. But I do not think that is true now. And so what I discovered over the last 3, 4 years working with a couple hundred companies is that most companies don't know how to take the positioning they've got and turn
Mhm.
it into a story that the sales team can use in a sales situation on a substantive first call. So the new book that I'm writing is exactly how to do that. You've got positioning right now. Here's how
Mhm.
we take positioning and turn that into a compelling story that anybody on your sales team could walk through with a customer, including doing things like qualification and discovery.
Yes, love that. Any, I'm sure you will want to say most of it for your book. Any kind of quick highlights there around?
Yeah. So
Mhm.
a lot if you look at what's happening in most tech companies, like in a sales pitch, like a lot of what the reps are doing is just a product walkthrough. It's like
Mhm.
the website has a button that says "Give me a demo," and if a
Mhm.
customer clicks on that button, that's all they're getting. It's a
Mhm.
demo. It's like, look, we have 4 drop down menus. Clicky, 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 clicky. Let me walk through each of them. And
Mhm.
so all this positioning work that we've done to sort of say, this is how we're different, and this is the value we can deliver that no one else can. We are
Yeah.
not saying those things in the sales pitch. We're just showing them everything and we're like, "You figure it out, customer. You
Mm.
figure out if those features, if everybody else has those features or only we have those features. You figure out what those features can do for your business. You figure it out." So,
Yes.
2 things I think we need to do in a good sales pitch. 1, the sales pitch should be oriented around your differentiated value. So that needs to be the core of the pitch, not every single little bell and whistle thing you can do. What are the things you can do that no one else can? And
Mhm.
why is that important for a customer's business? That's the first thing. That needs to be the core of what we're doing in sales. And in order to do that, we have to be able to paint a picture of not just our stuff, but a picture of the whole market and where we fit in it, so that a
Mhm.
customer can look at, these are the alternative ways of solving the problem. Here are the trade-offs for the different alternative ways. And our rep can be a guide that comes in and says, look, you can solve this problem in lots of different ways. But if you do it this way, you got this problem. If you do it this way, you got this problem. If you do it this way, you got this problem. And you know what? For companies like you, what you really need is A, B, C. And that's
Mhm.
what we do. Let me show you. Like,
Yes.
we're not doing that in sales pitches right now. So my book is an attempt to give you a structure that product marketing or marketing can work with sales on building a pitch that really communicates our differentiated value. Why pick us over the other guys?
Yes. I love that. And then obviously, yeah, the earlier step of that is marketing should be pitching should be, doing marketing activities towards customers for whom like that they know that like that's the thing, like that's the most important
Exactly.
differentiating factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that. Okay, cool. Gonna get into some questions from the audience now. Blake's gonna drop a couple in and we'll throw them up on stage. I can read them out and you can give them a shot answering it. Um, as I interview, I often get the question, what company has great positioning, which I personally don't like, but I do have an answer.
Oh, it's such a bad
Um,
question. I get
I'm
asked
wondering,
that all the time, right? I'm the positioning lead. They're like, who's doing it good?
yeah. Um, talk to us about that. I've seen you write a little bit on LinkedIn how you kind of can't, from the outside, you kind of can't know. I don't
Like,
know
you
that
kind of
anyone can
can't
ever
know.
know for sure. It's kind of a hypothesis about like what's going to be effective. So
Right. Like, you
yeah.
actually have to know a lot about the market landscape to understand whether or not the company's doing a good job of positioning. So,
Mhm,
you need to know, well, what are the competitors they compete with? And what is their differentiated value versus the other competitors, which you can't tell from just looking at the website.
mhm,
And so they might be nailing it, but you wouldn't know. If you're not the buyer, you would know. Now, the buyer should know,
mhm.
but if you're not in the target market, you wouldn't necessarily know. So
Right.
when people ask me this question, I usually just give them an example of somebody I've worked with recently where I think they're really smashing it on the positioning. Like, I did
Mhm,
some work with these guys, Postmen, and I think their
mhm,
positioning is amazing because
mhm,
I know where it was before, and people were
mhm.
super confused about what is this thing and why do I need it? People thought they were an API testing environment. They are not that. People thought they were an API gateway. They are not that. If you go to their website now, it's very clear they're a, a platform for building and delivering APIs. And
Mhm.
that is a thing that didn't exist before Postman said it existed. And what's so great about their positioning is you look at that and you're like, well, of course that's what they are. What else could they be? But tell me, like, it was not easy to get to
Yes.
that. But would anybody know that if you didn't happen to be an API developer? Would you know that positioning is good or bad? I don't know. And you don't even know who Postman's competitors are. And is that doing a good job of delivering, deals versus their competitors? It's really hard to answer that question. What people think they're asking, like what they really are asking is who has good messaging.
Yeah. Or who?
And
Yeah.
that's
Whose
different. And
messaging happens to resonate with you? Because I saw a
yeah,
couple. I like it.
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
who's got a nice
Yeah.
tagline? Like, like
Yeah.
the thing I always mentioned, that there's these folks that run a really great startup conference in Montreal called Startup Fest. I love them.
Mhm.
And but they do this thing that drives me nuts, and it's called Pitch to Grannies. And so what
Yeah.
it is they have these little old ladies come in,
Yeah.
and then they have all these startups come and do a pitch contest, and the judges are these little old ladies. And so the startups come in and they pitch, and the ladies decide who's going to win. And it drives me absolutely mental. I'm like, who cares? Like, unless you have a thing that you're selling to grandmothers, it does not matter whether you pitch to grannies well. Like, your messaging doesn't need to resonate with the grannies if you're selling, the head of database architecture at Google.
Right.
Like, in fact, the head of database architecture at Google is going to laugh you out of the room if you come in and pitch him like he's a granny. Like,
Right.
so this kind of stuff drives me nuts. So when most people say, who's doing this really good? They're thinking about consumer stuff. They want me to say,
Mm.
what's that death water? Liquid death.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. It's just water. And look at the amazing thing the marketing people did. B2B doesn't work like this, man. It's a totally different game.
Right. Yes. That's funny. Okay.
I'm going to say,
Um,
like, pick my thing because it's got cool skulls.
mhm.
Look at me. I
Yep.
laugh in the face of death. Oh,
Yes. I
I can't
know.
sell a database like that, man.
Yes. Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay. Liz asks, what are the best tips for reinforcing positioning without using the exact words, same exact words over and over? Do you suggest
Oh,
leaning into that kind of repetition intentionally or using the same
I
language?
love this question so much. So like here's the cold hard reality. You are going to say the same thing over and over and over again. And everybody on the marketing team is going to be so sick of it. Like they're like so sick of it. And at the exact moment when it's starting to hit in the market, everyone on the marketing team is going to be like
Just
we
tired
got to
of
do
it.
something new. This is
Yeah.
so boring. Oh my gosh, we've been saying the same thing for like whatever. But if you look at companies are really amazing at this stuff, like the positioning does not change that often. And they do say the same things over and over and over again. Now, if we're talking about campaigns, I can't be running the same campaign over and over and over again. Like, so I do need some variation in some of this stuff. But
Hmm.
like, I'm always using Snowflake as an example. Like Snowflake had this amazing trajectory of growth. They still have, but
Hmm.
things are a little rocky right now, but whatever. Amazing trajectory of growth. If you look at where they started up until like right after IPO, and they said the same thing. We're a data warehouse for the cloud, man. Super boring.
Yeah.
Data warehouse for the cloud. Super easy to understand. Big
Right.
need for it in the market. Now they're getting a little more creative because they've absolutely smashed data warehouse for the crowd. So now they're trying to expand the borders of that market and get a little bit more into like more use cases, a little bit more, data lake, all this other stuff. And now they're like cloud data and talking about what that is. But
Hmm.
that's like, years into it. Like,
Yes.
so I think part of the game here with making your positioning stick is consistency, and the marketing team in particular is going to get really bored of it. And so whoever's in charge of that, so when I was a VP marketing, like one of the hardest jobs I had was getting the team to pick it and stick it and not mess with it when it ain't broke.
Hmm.
But we will naturally get bored of it right around the time where it's starting to work.
Yes. Yeah, that's really interesting. Just kind of brings up thoughts for me around, your book talks about the three different it's like strategies of positioning, like the head to head versus,
Yeah.
in a niche versus creating a new category, and like, what are the best strategies for the right messaging for those. And certainly like in Snowflake's case, it seems like they change every time. They were one of the first like kind of data lake in the cloud companies. And then,
Data
they're
warehouse in the cloud.
done. Now
Yeah.
you got to find a way to differentiate. So
Well, they like
yeah.
I used to always use them as a great example of it doesn't have to be complicated. Like
Mhm.
we know what a data warehouse is. Like if we're
Mhm.
in data, we all know what a data warehouse is. There's nothing new and fancy about that. Like
Mhm.
and that's not a new market category. We all know what a data warehouse is. And they just showed up and said, "We're a data warehouse, but it's built for the cloud." Now, there's a story behind that about why you can't take a data warehouse that wasn't built for the cloud and just smash it into the cloud. So there's a really important storytelling component in there where you're like, look, like here's why cloud data warehousing is different than data warehousing on-prem. But all that growth and all that stuff they had was on that very simple message. Like, what are you? We're data warehouse. You know what that is? Well, we're that, but for the cloud.
Mhm.
Oh, well, what's it need to do in the
Yep.
cloud? Well, actually, a lot of stuff that's different. Let me tell you about it.
Yep.
Now they're expanding a little bit more, right? But that's been in the last couple of years. But even that, they've been fairly consistent on that. They've had one change, and it's like now we're cloud data. This is what that means. This is what you can do. But it's interesting. Like I would say, if you talk to, you know, 2 dozen data people and ask them what does Snowflake do, they'd say cloud data warehousing.
Right.
I think they did a
Yeah.
really good job of picking that and sticking it.
Yes. Interesting. Okay. Last one here. When do you need to spend time creating a positioning doc at the company? Total when you're doing total new products for new features, doing competitive intel.
Yeah. So, I'll tell you the way I used to run it when I was in-house. Usually I get hired as the VP marketing, and at some point we would do a positioning like effort, right? We get a cross-functional team together and we'd work on the positioning. And then when we had the positioning, we would then take that positioning and then we'd write messaging that maps to the positioning. And we would have a messaging document. And in that messaging document, it would include the positioning. Like, here's our target market, here's our competitors, la, la, la. And then we'd have the messaging. Here's the official way we talk about differentiated value. It's all in there in the document.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have every 6 months, we would do a check-in on the positioning. And so we would get the same cross-functional team together and say, okay, look, competitors, are we seeing anybody new show up that we didn't talk about the last time? And differentiated capabilities, are those the same? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
we've had a new release, and so we've got stuff that they don't, or maybe competitors have had a new release and they've caught up to us. And so then we would look at differentiated value. Like, has that changed enough that we actually need to tune our differentiated value? If it does, then we need to get the gang together, rework on the positioning, make an adjustment, and then redo the messaging and the sales pitch that goes with that. A lot of the
Mm-hmm.
times we get the gang together and there'd be some little changes, but not enough to actually change the positioning. So sometimes we have a new release and the positioning doesn't change. It's just reinforcing the current positioning we already have.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we do a new release and it does. So we would just have a standing meeting every 6 months to come in and look at the positioning. Now, the exception to that would be something big happens in the market. So, we got a big competitor gets acquired, or I had one where we had a very strategic partnership with a company. Company was MySQL. We had a really strategic partnership with MySQL, and our positioning really leaned into that. And then they got acquired by Sun, and we're like, crap. So 6 months later, we had to go back and redo the positioning, but then we redid it. And then we started getting a really good relationship with Sun, and that was all working good for about a year or so, less than that actually. And then Sun got acquired by Oracle, and we're like, poo.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to go back, and so we repositioned 3 times in like less than a year, just because stuff beyond our control. I've had
Yes.
other products that I've worked on where the positioning has lasted for decades and we never really touched it. That's pretty rare
Hmm.
in tech, but it does
Yeah.
happen sometimes.
Yeah.
The key is you got a regular meeting to check in on it, because new competitor will creep up or stuff will change. And if there's no regular meeting to check in on it, then the change will happen. Your positioning will start getting weak before, and you won't notice it until it's a real problem. And then it's
Mm-hmm.
an emergency. And now we got to have the emergency positioning meeting, and that's not fun.
Right. Love that. Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for everyone that came out. I know everyone's busy, so appreciate everyone spending a bit of their day with us. As a reminder, these events are put on by the Launch Awesome community. Blake's going to drop a link in the chat right now to apply. So yeah, if you're interested in joining, check that out. April, thanks again so much for being here. Where can folks find you to connect more?
Yeah. So I'm these days on social media, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. So you should go
Mhm.
follow me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of stuff on Twitter, but I don't know, Twitter's
Yeah.
just not the same. It's not the same. And
Yeah.
my website's aprildunford.com, and occasionally I publish stuff there too.
Yes. Cool. All righty. Well, thanks so much, and we'll see everyone next time.
Okay. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Appreciate it. See ya.